Chapter 16. Sacred Origins and Human Hands. The Dual Legacy of Ancient Judaism. Though much of the modern disintegration of humanity's connection to Source can be traced to the institutional machinery of the Catholic Church and the British monarchy, the roots of this spiritual severance go deeper. These dominant forces, while responsible for widespread colonization of the soul and earth alike, were inheritors, not originators, of a longer lineage of distortion. Among the oldest contributors to this unraveling is Judaism, not in its mystical essence, but in its institutional form. As the first of the Abrahamic traditions, it laid down the foundational structures upon which later religions would build. The idea of a chosen people, codified moral law, centralized spiritual authority, and the exclusion of the divine feminine from mainstream worship. It is entirely possible, even likely, that Judaism originated in genuine moral alignment, a revelation of universal justice, cosmic order, and sacred responsibility. The early Hebrew mystics, prophets, and poets did not invent a system of control. They channeled a vision of ethical communion with the divine. But over centuries, through mistranslation, misinterpretation, political consolidation, and patriarchal restructuring, that vision hardened into law. What began as a living fire became a stone tablet. In that transformation, divine truth calcified into male-dominated structure and carried with it a tragic consequence: the systematic exclusion and persecution of women and the suppression of their sacred role in spiritual enlightenment. This pattern, set in motion thousands of years ago, has echoed through every religious institution that followed. This is the dual legacy of ancient Judaism, a container of some of the most powerful metaphysical truths ever encoded into language, and a forerunner of the very religious gatekeeping that would later define the spiritual crisis of modernity. In the deep past, before Judaism became a formal religion, it was a mystical current, a direct communion between a people and a formless divine intelligence. This current flowed not from temples or texts, but through the wilderness, dreams, visions, and acts of justice. Energetically, this was a fire and water religion, alive with prophecy, poetry, and emotion. The Psalms weep and rage. The prophets cry out for the poor. The God of the early Hebrews was not aloof but intimate. But as always happens in time, fire was captured and water was dammed. As the Israelites settled, a transformation occurred. The free-flowing fire of revelation was channeled into ritual and eventually bureaucracy. The Levitical priesthood emerged, not simply to preserve the sacred, but to administer it. Only priests could approach the Holy of Holies. Sacrifice became the language of communion. Access was controlled. What had been a mystical relationship became a transactional system. Divine energy became dependent on blood offerings. Spiritual knowledge became the property of a class. Women, once prophetesses and judges, were increasingly marginalized. The institution began to reflect the broader shift of the ancient world, from egalitarian tribalism to male-dominated hierarchy, from symbolic experience to literal law, from feminine inclusion to patriarchal control. This change wasn't unique to Judaism, but Judaism, due to its age and influence, set a template that others would follow. Christianity and Islam would later take these same patterns and amplify them globally. Central to Jewish identity was the Torah, a sacred text of immense spiritual, historical, and philosophical depth. But as centuries passed, interpretation turned to codification. Law multiplied. The mystical was buried under commentary. Spirit yielded to structure. 613 mitzvot, commandments, governed daily life. Legal debates replaced visionary experience. The spiritual mission of chosenness was warped into exceptionalism. What began as a divine contract of responsibility was now too often a line of division, between the sacred and the profane, the Jew and the Gentile, the priest and the people, the male and the female. And though Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah, preserved hidden truths about cosmic unity, reincarnation, and sacred geometry, these teachings were kept secret, often from women, outsiders, and even most Jews themselves. Judaism never lost its mysticism, it merely buried it. The Zohar, the Sefer Yetzirah, and other Kabbalistic texts preserved energetic maps of the cosmos, taught of divine emanations, Sephirot, and revealed the Shekinah, the exiled divine feminine presence. This mystical thread reveals a Judaism that is profoundly aligned with elemental consciousness. Keter and Malkuth, crown and earth, divine polarity. Binah, understanding, and Chokmah, wisdom, feminine and masculine aspects of creation. Tiferet, the heart center, balancing all. But these truths were restricted, kept from the very people who needed them most. Access required initiation, status, and alignment with male rabbinical authority. And so, even in the tradition that most closely preserved the energetic architecture of reality, the feminine principle was exiled, mirroring the exile of the Shekinah from the earth. The institutional form of Judaism would pass its structure, its brilliance, and its control mechanisms into the two major world religions that followed. Christianity borrowed the messianic narrative, but added empire. Islam embraced monotheism and law, but expanded its political reach. Both took the Abrahamic texts, shaped by millennia of male-centered interpretation, and used them to justify further persecution of women, eradication of indigenous spiritualities, and global conquest. Thus, while the Catholic Church and the British monarchy bear responsibility for modern spiritual severance, the original fracture may have begun long before, with the decision to codify, to exclude, and to silence the feminine in one of the world's first enduring religious institutions. The original balance of elemental wisdom became distorted. Earth and air dominated. Fire and water were veiled. The spirit could no longer flow freely through the people. It had to pass through a priest, a page, or a penalty. Today, many Jewish spiritual seekers, especially women, mystics, and marginalized voices, are reawakening the original fire. They are reclaiming the Shekinah, reviving Kabbalah, and honoring earth-based spirituality once exiled by orthodoxy. In doing so, they are not breaking from their tradition, they are redeeming it. The task is not to discard the past, but to recognize where human hands obscured divine light, and to clear away the layers of law and fear so that what remains is the original covenant. That the divine lives in all things. That no soul is excluded. That the feminine is not a threat, but the missing piece.